If your food photos look like the plate is about to slide right off the table, even though you know it's sitting perfectly flat, this video is going to help solve that mystery for you. What's shakin' bacon? I'm Joni Simon, food photographer. Welcome to my studio. So I want to explain to you what exactly causes this perspective distortion and why ultimately your shooting distance matters much more than your lens choice. I'm also going to share with you the post-processing fix that can also help to alleviate this issue. So let's start out with understanding what perspective distortion actually is, because a lot of folks don't really understand what's happening here. Perspective distortion occurs because we're trying to capture a three-dimensional world on a flat two-dimensional sensor. Think about it like this. When you look out a long hallway with your eyeballs, the walls appear to get closer together as they recede into the distance, even though you absolutely know those walls are parallel. That's natural perspective, and our brains are used to interpreting it as correct. But when we photograph that same hallway from an angle, stay standing close to one wall looking down the length, the camera captures exactly what's there, but it looks exaggerated and unnatural because it's a flat two-dimensional photograph. The wall closest to us appears massive, while the far end looks really small. And so in food photography, this happens a lot of times. Picture shooting a beautiful charcuterie board from a 45-degree angle. The cheese and the crackers that are closest to your camera appear huge, while the items at the back look much smaller and further away. Or if you're photographing a dining table and the place setting nearest to you dominates the frame, while the settings that are further back look smaller. But here's the part that makes things look like they're sliding off the table, is that when you shoot at an angle, that the far edge of a plate, if we're just shooting a plate, the far edge of the plate appears much smaller than the near edge, and your brain expects a circular plate to look circular even when viewed from an angle. But perspective distortion makes that far edge shrink down so dramatically that the plate looks much more like an oval that's tilted away from you. And think about it this way. If you hold a plate at eye level and slowly tilt it away from you, at what point does it start to look like it might slide out of your hands? It's when the far edge becomes noticeably smaller than the near edge. And here's another example that really shows this effect is we have two drinks on a table, and the glass that's in the center of your frame looks perfectly vertical, but the glass at the edge of your frame appears to be leaning. Both glasses are sitting perfectly straight on the table, but because of the angle of your camera, the edges of your frame capture these vertical lines at different angles relative to your sensor. The glass at the edge gets stretched by perspective, making it look like it's tilting when it's actually just the geometry of how your flat sensor is capturing that angled view. But now you may have noticed you have more perspective distortion when you're shooting a wide angle lens compared to a telephoto, a longer focal length lens. And you're right to notice that difference. Wide angle lenses, like things 24 millimeters, maybe even 35 millimeters, they do seem to create more obvious perspective distortion in food photography. But here's where it gets interesting, is that the reason wide angle lenses appear to create more distortion is often not necessarily because of the lens itself, it's because of how we use them. Because when you want to fill the frame with your dish using a 24 millimeter lens, you naturally get much closer to your subject. Whereas when you use an 85 millimeter lens to fill the frame, you step back further. It's this change in distance that creates the greater distance in perspective effects, not inherently the focal length. Because, and hang in there with me, I know this might be like, wait, geometry class, my brain is crunching, I feel it. Hang in there, I've got some visual examples. It's gonna totally make sense. But think about it, when you are physically close to the subject, the distance difference between the front and the back of your scene is significant compared to your shooting distance. For example, if you are 2 feet from your plate, the front edge of the plate might be 2 feet away, while the back edge is 3 feet away. That's a 50% difference in distance. But if you are 10 feet away, the front edge of the plate is 10 feet away and the back is 11 feet away. That's only a 10% difference in distance. And so that's why distance dramatically affects how proportional elements appear in your final image. And that's why often it's recommended to use a longer focal length in shooting in an angle, because you can much more easily fill the frame while being further away from the subject. But of course, we can always fix it in post. There are correction tools built into your photo editing programs like Lightroom, Photoshop, and Capture One. Even mobile apps like VSCO have these tools. So let's walk through this in Lightroom. So here we have this image inside of Capture One, and we still have a little bit of perspective distortion going on here and here. Even though I have captured this at 70 millimeters, which means I backed up, I zoomed in a bit, we've got that longer focal length, but still we have just a little bit of distortion going on the edges. So what do? Well, you have inside of the shape area here in Capture One, we have the lens correction area, which you can kind of play with and see, does that solve the problem we have? And in this case, not really. We still have just that little bit of distortion going on. Sometimes this will solve the problem because it is more a function of the lens, but in this case, it really is that perspective distortion. So in which case, we want to use the keystone area. If you don't have this in your lineup, all you have to do is right click, hit Add Tool, and select Keystone, and this should then be added to your menu options. And so now what we have are these various guides that we can use for fixing vertical distortion, horizontal distortion, or both vertical and horizontal distortion. For this particular image, it's really that vertical orientation that's the problem, right? We have sort of jetting off this direction slightly and this direction slightly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select just the vertical, and I'm going to go ahead and inch this just a little further out. And I want to align these with the line that I want now straightened, right? Because we think it would look more natural. Again, we don't want to overcorrect here, but it would look more natural if this was more vertical as opposed to tilted off to the left. So I'm just going to line this line up here with the glass. And I'm going to do the same for this one. There we go. And then you see this apply button has now popped up. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. And what did it do? It took those lines and made them vertical. So now if I come into the crop tool and I just crop this, look at that, vertical lines. Now I may have overcorrected slightly here. So let's go ahead and undo that. Okay. And I'm going to take another run at it. All right. So vertical, that looks good. This one I don't want quite so dramatic because you see the further we go, the more it's going to inch that up. So I'm just going to make it a little bit ever so slight. There we go. Hit apply. Very nice. Okay, go and crop in. And that was just a few clicks to fix that perspective distortion. So there's our before and our after. And so remember, perspective distortion isn't always a lens problem. It's often a physics problem, a geometry problem. But also don't avoid the angles because they honestly make such compelling compositions. It's just important to recognize when distortion is affecting your image and how to correct it. So I'd love to know, did this solve the sliding plate problem? I'd love to hear about it down in the comments section below, any ahas you had. And of course, as always, thank you so much for stopping by the studio. I hope you have a fantastic day, you stay out of trouble, and I'll see you soon, all right? Bye. Sliding plate problem.